Okay, the moment of truth, everybody. We're going to print our first test part here. I've had this thing warming up. We're shooting for a nozzle temperature of 204 and a bed temperature of 60. So we're just about right on the mark here. Alright, we're going to move back over to our main screen. And we're going to go ahead and hit print. Make sure we select the correct file here. And there we go. And we're off, you guys. I'll come back with a little time lapse on this after we get started. Just point out really quick that I did the pre-system check here. I did a bed level and all that, and we should be pretty good. What I'm printing here first is the very stem, the very front part of the ship, kind of the bow area. Should wind up being about maybe 8 inches long or so. We're printing it standing up, and I did decide to do a skirt around this for some support, and we've got some internal supports built up too, so hopefully that works out well. Okay, so we're off and running. I'll come back in just a little bit here and show you maybe when we get around 5 to 10% or so and see how things are going. Knocking on wood, guys. Hope it works out good. Okay, you guys. Well, we're about 18% in here, it looks like. And things are looking pretty good. I'm, you know, a newbie and a first timer on this, so I'm not sure if the little chunks of stuff I see on the sides there that look to be kind of loose will just come right off of the part once we get it off of the printer here when it's all done. But I'm getting a little worried about the snags that it's making when it's going over the internal supports there, and hopefully it doesn't knock any of those loose. They'll be easier to knock over the taller they get, I think. But I'm kind of thinking here, you guys, that I learned something already, that this particular part, since I put the little skirt around the bottom of it, you can see, I may not have needed to do these internal supports here. These are for when you're going to do like an overhang or whatever, and I don't think there's a whole lot of that on this part, that it kind of tapers and gets narrower as it goes up. So we'll see how this goes. And I'll come back with another, maybe around 35%, we'll have another look again. But so far I'm really liking the rivet detail, and the print marks on the sides of the flat surfaces don't look to be too bad at all. So, but you can see a couple little loose filaments here and there, but you know, I'm not sure about this. I'm not experienced enough to tell you if that's good or bad, if they'll just break right off and come off clean when we're all done here. One thing I learned just now is to keep the camera far enough away not to get the bed pushed into it. But pretty neat so far, you guys. We'll come back in a little bit and show you a little bit more. Alright everybody, well I'm here to show you some basic software that's required for doing this 3D printing, and this is a slicer program. This particular program is from a company called Cura, and I'm only using this one because this is the one that my brother-in-law is using with his printer, and it works very well for him. And I have the same exact printer, so we decided it would be a good idea, so he did a nice little Zoom chat session with me and walked me through how to basically, you know, navigate my way around and use the basics of this system. So I'm just going to kind of show you what I've learned about it so far to get you started. So you can see on the screen here what we have is we have a layout of our printer bed. Now I've got the default setting here to Any Cubic Vyper, which is the machine I'm using, so it's already knowing what size bed I have and all that, and what the capabilities of the machine are. You can see over here on the right hand side we have this drop down menu, and these are your basic printer settings, which are, some are really important and some you don't really have to worry about. But you can see you've got things like your layer height, your printing temperatures, which are very important depending on the type of filament that you're using. The bed temperature settings for that's how much heat it's going to put into the bed to make the part stick on there while it's printing. Very important that that part doesn't move through the whole printing process. But a lot of these settings are, these other settings in here are default settings, you guys, that I really didn't have to do much with them. One important one that I want to show you down here when it comes to what we call supports. Now, a basic concept that you have to understand about 3D printing, you guys, is that we're mostly working on a 3D object, but anywhere that there's a horizontal plane, in other words, a plane that goes across like this, unless there's something in the object not already there, if that's a void of some kind, the printer cannot make that, right? So it needs support underneath that. So it has to, it can't print into thin air, if you can kind of think of it that way. It's mostly on the horizontal plane. All right, and what you'll find out is that areas that need to be supported, you'll have to put supports in there, and you'll want to work on strategies of where you want to put those, how many. It dramatically affects how long the print's going to take to finish and the overall structure of the print. But that's probably one of the most critical things to learn about this whole process. These settings that are in here are important, yes, but once you get your printer basically dialed in as far as the speed, the layer height, the build temperatures, those pretty much are going to stay, depending on if you're using the same type of filament on the different parts, pretty much the same. And it's just a matter of trial and error, you guys. Now, there's this little thing you can do called, you can print what they call a temperature tower. You can find videos on YouTube about that. And it builds these little towers, and you can, with that particular setup, it will change the temperature settings, and that when the part's all finished being printed, in theory, you should be able to look at that and say, okay, at this particular temperature, this is when the print looks the best, right? It looks the smoothest, or whatever the, whatever the standard is for a good-looking print. You can kind of pick and choose, and that'll kind of tell you where to dial your machine in. I was printing so many parts here and having failures and trying things that I was able to kind of dial in my temperature through trial and error that way. But there are easier ways to do that. Okay, so just kind of, you want to get into that full, those are some important things that you definitely want to check out as far as your temperature settings and all that. The speed and the layer thickness and all that have to do with like the overall quality of the print, so you have to kind of make a trade-off on how much detail quality you want there, given the fact that a filament printer has its limits, and then the other fact of how long you want the print to take. In my case, I have like not putting the emphasis at all on speed, right? So whatever these parts take to print, they're just going to take that long. I'm not in any kind of hurry whatsoever. So I'm kind of going more towards the quality side, and it may be up to you what you want to do, and that all depends on the particular model that you're working with too, how much detail it actually has. If it's a low detail model, there's no point in setting your detail settings up really high, because it's not going to really improve anything. But in this particular case, we've got these rivets and all these little things on the outside of our Nautilus model here that we want fairly decent crisp detail going on there. And that has to do with the layer height, the print speed, and all that. But you can scroll through your, and see all these settings. Now, getting back to the supports I was talking about, you have a couple different options here for the actual edge that will be built around your part as it comes off of the build plate. You have a brim, a skirt, a raft, and none. Well, through trial and error again, I've kind of honed in on the brim, you guys. What that means is basically like the brim on a hat. What it's going to do is every time it makes a print, let me get down off this screen here. When it puts the part in here, it's going to make a little bit of an edge around that. And what that's going to do is provide support and extra sticking power, so that the part's stuck down onto that build plate really good and it cannot get a chance of moving. If that part moves even a micrometer, the build's or the print's going to be ruined, you guys, because the axes are all going to be off. The printer's still going to try to keep printing it in the same spot it was before, so everything's going to be crooked, and it's going to ruin it from that point up when it tries to stack it up, you guys. So you cannot lose the adhesion here. That's really important. But as we go over here, let me bring in a part now. I'm going to click Open Files. I've got all my files saved on this hard drive for this particular model. And I'm going to click probably the most complex part that we have on the entire hull section here. I saved this for last because I wanted to figure out how to get these other parts to print pretty decent before I got to this part. And I'm glad I did, because it's taught me a lot so far. Now, this is a really complex part, so it's going to take just a second for it to load. But once it pops in there, we can start working with it. Okay, you can see it popped into place, and this is the salon area of the ship with those famous kind of bay windows. and it's got some support that's required on the inside of it. So, but what I'm going to do, the very first thing, you guys, now, this particular model, it's noted that if you build this at 100% scale, this model will build out to 66 inches long. And that's way too big for my purposes. That's more like if you're going to make this into an RC submarine or something like that. I'm just building a static display model. So I decided to go smaller than that. Also, there are limitations to your build plate. You can only build so big. Now, this obviously will not fit on my plate. You can see here at full scale. So if you want to build as big as possible, you're just going to have to do trial and error to like scale these down until you can get to the maximum amount and it'll still fit on the plate. But I decided right off the bat, I'm going to go at 65%. So I'm coming over here to the left-hand panel, clicking on Scale, going to this top line right here and typing in 65.0, clicking that. And you can see it changed the size, guys. And now, very important, you have to do this every single time for every one of these parts that you bring in. Okay? Otherwise, the scale is going to be off. Like, you could print this at 65% and the next one's going to be at 100%. And the parts obviously aren't going to match up. So I got into the habit of making sure I do that the very first thing. Now we want to bring it onto the print bed, so we can click Move. You got these kind of axis things here you can grab a hold of, and we're just going to grab, drag, and drop. And move this right onto the middle of the print bed and just let go of it. That sets it down like that. Okay, now you can see the part overall. Now this particular files that I got for this model, you get half and half. You get one whole set that doesn't have the rivets and the other set that does have the rivet detail. So I make sure every time I bring these in, I'm grabbing the right ones. You can see we got the nice rivet detail there. Alright. Now, here's the critical thing we're looking for, you guys. All these areas that are highlighted in red here as we rotate this around, this program is telling us that we need support in that area. Remember what I talked about? The horizontal plane going across like this? If nothing is supported there, that's not gonna print because it's not seeing it as part of the it can't print into thin air like that. Okay, so you think, okay, well, the floor is down on the plate. Well, it's not seeing it that way. You have to have a little space in between it. All right, so now what I got into the habit of doing was I'll take and rotate this part around. I'm going to do that for you here now. We're going to go over to the rotate button, and I'm going to cheat a little bit here because I already figured this out. But what I figured out, you guys, in this particular part, when I stand it up on end, I just went 90 degrees, dropped it back down. Now we're going to look up inside, and we see that we got rid of a lot of that red, you guys. Remember that whole floor, the roof, and everything? Now we've just got this these little trusses that are in here that are going to need support, and it's showing a little bit of support needed around these kind of window bays where it makes this little radius right here on the outside. Well, again, this goes back to trial and error, you guys, where let me get this rotated. This is the glitchiest part, you guys, because as you start doing more and more, the program starts to slow down. This laptop I have doesn't have the most power, so you have to kind of work with it. You get a little delay. But anyway, you can see what we're looking at here. It's telling us we need supports. Well, I figured out through trial and error that my printer, depending on if I've got the speed and everything set up just right and the temperature, it will actually make these radiuses right here, because we've already built something up underneath of it. You see what I mean? We're not starting out there from nothing. The model's going to build from this point up, and so we've already got this underneath of it. And as long as it's not like a perfect 90-degree turn, it's got a little bit of a radius to it right there, my printer will make that, okay? And if it gets a little bit rough, no problem, as long as it doesn't just leave a void there. I can always clean that up with a little bit of modeling, basic modeling 101. So I'm not really going to worry about that. All right, now what we do have to do is we do have to support all these little trusses in here. All right, now my brother-in-law pointed out a really nice little plug-in for this program. You can go up here to this thing called Marketplace. You click on that, and you'll have all these free plugins that are available for this program. One that he told me I needed to get was custom supports, and the other one was a little program, I forget the name of it, but you'll find it in there, where it adds a pop-up balloon to all this menu stuff. Like, so normally it wouldn't show all the detailed information about what all this stuff does. Now, as you can see, when you scroll over it, it pops up and it shows you the little window of like, okay, everything, what does all this stuff do? It's a lot more detailed, okay? So that's a nice one to have. But so now that I've got this custom support plugin, I can go down here to, first you got to click on the model. Okay, go down here to this little tube looking thing, and we've got this little menu right here. And we've got a tube, we've got this is actually a rod, we've got a hollow tube, we've got like a square, what do they call this one, abutment, freeform, it kind of looks like a star, and this is just a backing piece or whatever, okay? Now I'm going with, most of the time, going with this cylinder. All right, now you can change the size of these just by clicking on that and typing in the number you want. And you're going to use those depending on the size of the part you're trying to cover. Now, what we're going to do here is we're going to start dropping in supports here, you guys. Now, what I found out through trial and error again was that I was starting out here on the bottom, okay, and I was starting to put in these supports one by one. Well, I found out that these supports extend all the way through on an even plane. So instead of putting these in from the bottom first, I found out, for example, like, let's see, this needs to be supported right through here, right? And this little part right here. Let's go ahead and show you. Get the model brought back up. Let's bring up tube. And just for example, I'm gonna use a number 2 size for the tube. I'm gonna click right here at the very top. You can see. Let me zoom in a little bit more for you guys. Okay, so you go like that. Now you see what that did? It brought that all the way through on that same plane, you guys. So it basically covered this whole thing. So I've been wasting my time putting these all in down here, where when I got to the top and did it, it was going to do that anyway. So that's just something that I learned, okay? So now let's say we put another one in here. All right, and then we're going to come up here and put one in. Again, I'm just using the default number 2. Well, let's say we want to cover a little bit more area. We're going to go here. All right, we can all go back up in here and hit undo. Get rid of that one. Now we're going to put in a bigger one. Let's put in a number 6, let's say, to cover more ground, so we don't have to use as many supports. The less supports you use, guys, the less time it will take to print. All right. Now let's put one of these bigger ones and see what that did. Get that zoomed in. We covered more ground. I'll probably only have to put 2 of those in there. See what I mean? All right. And I'm just doing this fast. Now, if there's certain areas you don't want it to interfere with, like I want to keep the tops of these things here flat, all right, because that's where the floor of the interior is going to sit on top of that. You can see that we might have an issue right here where these they might be sticking up too high. So I'm going to zoom in. First of all, we're going to go up here to the move. Now we got these axes that showed up, right? We're going to zoom in a little bit. And now you can see how that one's kind of above that little flat surface right there. I'm just going to lower that down. Just like that. We can click on the next one here, do the same thing. Get that where it's below that surface. You see that? I think this one here might be a little bit too high. You can move them back and forth this way. And you can move them in and out on that axis. But see, we just continue doing this. I'll just go ahead and use a big one here, but we would just do that. And that's going to, let me get back on the supports. That's just going to put that all the way in, all the way through, just like that, and cover up all those same ones. Now, it's not going to work for every part like this, you guys. But this particular part, it lined up just perfect. And I would continue doing that until I got both of these sides fully supported. And then I'm not going to worry about the rest. Now, another little thing I'll show you. You can see the model has these the limber holes on the outside here where the water drains out, and on the inside here it's showing you that they're going to need a little support right where they start. Well, again, we're building up to that point. You see what I mean? We're not starting out from nothing. We've already built up to that a little bit. Now, I found that changing my temperature to a little bit higher and slowing the print speed down a little bit makes it to where the printer can actually make these with no problem, because I'm letting the filament come out hotter where it actually has a chance to grab on there and not get too cold right away before it just falls off, right? And then the slower speed as far as how long it takes to drop it, try to drop it across there, right? And that made a difference to where, yeah, it starts out a little bit rough, but it gets good enough to where it will fill it in. And then all I have to do as a modeler, after the part's been printed, I can go back in there and do a little sanding and put a little drop of resin in there or whatever to clean that up. You know, modeling 101, which, by the way, you are still going to be doing plenty of modeling 101 with these parts. You're not going to get perfectly printed parts. You're going to need to be doing cleanup, sanding, getting burrs off of it here and there, and patching and fixing little things once in a while. So this is not scot-free. You know, this does everything for you. You still got to have modeling skills, okay? But just to give you an example, I figured out that my printer will do that, Okay. Now, one last thing, and I'll give you a reason why I had a failed print with this, because it's something I didn't notice. If we go here to the very front of the model, and we look where this is laying on the build plate, whoops, you can see that this little flange that comes around, right, on this particular area right here, let me see if I can tilt it a little bit where you can see it better. It doesn't go all the way up to the top of the model. There's a gap right here. So again, what's going to happen? You're saying, well, it's on the build plate, but yeah, but the printer doesn't see anything here. There's no, this is not the model. This is just a void. Okay, so when it comes around to print this flange, when it gets to right here, it's just going to start blowing filament all over the place because there's nothing there for it to do. It's not seeing anything. Okay, so we got to support this thing. Now, the only reason I didn't catch this before is that all the other parts of this model, this flange wraps all the way around. Just on this one particular part, it didn't. So when I tried to print it the first time, the minute it got past the flange and started building up, I started seeing spaghetti. And you don't want to see that, all right? So now what we got to do, flip it over on its side here. We'll kind of zoom out a little bit. We're going to go back over and click on the model and click back on our supports. We're going to go back down to these really small ones. We'll make these a number 2 again. Okay. Oh, I'm going to have to undo that one. I didn't mean to click that. You got the undo button right up here. Okay. Now, we're going to put supports in on this little flange right here, just like this. One there. One there. One there. And so on and so forth, you guys, all the way until that whole thing is covered. Going all the way around that corner. You see, the flange itself comes up to right there. That's going to be fine. But this part right here, it's not going to print unless we connect it to something. All right? And that ought to be fine. Again, I just did this. You can change views here and come in and you can see I've got some gaps in there. I'd need to bring these a little bit closer together. I just did it real quick for you, but you see you see the basic concept of this, you guys. So inspect these parts really closely when you're setting them up, and you should save yourself a lot of grief. Okay. Now we've got everything fully prepared in theory. We've looked over the model really good. We think it's ready. Now we're going to come down here to this little box that says slice, and when we click that, it's going to take a couple of minutes here because it's going to completely re-render the model and turn this now into what they call a G code, which the printer can understand. All right, and that's what the printer will work with to actually produce this physical object, the axis that it needs to move up and down, and the amount of filament to use. All right, so it'll take a second. Once it's all sliced, we now have it what we call a G file that's ready to head over to the printer and be printed out. But we can do a couple more things with that before we actually commit to that final step of actually printing the part. We can actually look at this in a preview and see how it's actually going to physically print on the bed in real time, which can give you little clues here and there of whether this will be a successful print or not. All right, so let's just give that a second. Now I want to mention quick about this slice. Every time you make one adjustment in here, let's say you went in here and you thought you had it all done, you sliced it, and then you kind of went in here and messed around again, like maybe took a couple supports out or added a couple more. You got to re-slice it every time. So you think of it as if you're playing a video game to save that stage, you guys. Every time you do something, you have to save it. Otherwise, it's only going to remember the last one. And if you go to leave the program and you forget to slice it, the program's not going to remind you to slice it. So you just lost everything that you did after that certain point. Okay, so I don't usually hit slice at all until I'm down to where I think I've already got it ready. But once in a while when we do this little preview thing, if I see something, I'm going to have to go in there and fix it and then re-slice it again. So let's just give it a second here to finish slicing. This is the highest load on the computer right here when it's doing this, so it's going to be a little bit slow. Okay, so, and again, there are other little tools in here you can use. One's called support blockers. Those have to go in place before you add the supports, right? So like, let's say you don't want any supports on the outside of the model at all. You got to put those support blockers on the model first before you add the supports, otherwise it's just going to override that. That's a whole other thing. You have to spend time figuring out where you want to use those or not. But what I'm basically trying to do here, you guys, is just put supports in that are only on the inside of the model. If it shows up going through part of the outside, I just won't use it. I'll try to figure out another way, okay? So you can see here that we've got our information now. It's saying it's going to take 1 day, 3 hours to print this, and it's going to use 218 grams of filament, or 72.9 meters. Okay, and now we have the option to save it to our disk. Well, we don't want to quite do that yet. We've got this little button over here that says preview, so let's click that, and you're going to see it's going to completely change the way the model looks here. Now you can see what's happened here, you guys, is this is the way it's actually going to appear as it builds on the build plate. And I'm going to tilt this just a little bit and then zoom in on it for you. It's really going to drag slow now because we're really putting a load on the machine with all this information on this one file. Those of you out there who have a better machine will probably move along a little faster, but you get the general idea here. Okay, and I'm going to zoom in on it. Okay, now what we have here, you guys, remember that little thing I called a brim? It's created this brim all the way around the edge of our model here, which is going to help the model stick to the build plate, right? Now, the way that the printer works is it will leave an extra thin little line right here where this attaches. So in theory, this will easily break off of the model when you're done and you pull it off of the bed. Okay, you'll be able to go around that with your hand and break that off. Again, there is cleanup involved. You're going to use a hobby knife, sandpaper, whatever, to get these parts cleaned back up. But everywhere that we put in a support, it also put a brim around that. You see that, guys? That's very important because these tubes are really tiny and narrow. And in this case, it might be like 6 or 7 inches tall. So you can imagine the printer trying to print all that up all the way to the top, and that not accidentally getting bumped or something, or tipping over. Because if it tips over or moves, that can wind up getting into all your other... It can ruin the print, you guys. So now the supports are created for those... the brim is created on the supports too, so they have a much better chance of staying in place when the model prints out. All right, that's that in a nutshell. Okay, so now we can come over here and we can hit our preview slider bar. So I'm just going to drag this all the way down. And now you can see in real time how this model will actually print off of the bed. It's going to take it a second to get all the way down to the bottom here. Okay, starting off with just our support, you can see right there. Okay, I'm going to start bringing it up layer by layer. You can see what's going on. Okay, and if there are any voids or weird things that pop up in here, you can kind of home in on that and say, okay, that's not going to print right. But for the most part, it looks like it's all there. You can go all the way through this whole thing. All right. It's also got a play feature down here that will actually play it and show you the printer moving around and all that. It draws a tremendous amount of resources on the computer, so if I hit it right now, it's just going to totally lag out. I won't do that. So now what I would do, if I'm all satisfied with everything, you guys, I would come down here and hit save to disk. I'd normally have my little thumb drive plugged into the side of the computer here. It would save it to that disk, all right? And then I would take that disk over to my printer, plug it in, and scroll to the file menu and find that file and hit print, and we're off to the races, you guys. That's all there is to that part of it. So that's a basic overview of a slicing program and what that actually does. Again, I knew nothing about this. I thought it was going to be a lot more complicated than that, but it's really not that bad, you guys. I mean, again, there are a lot of things in here, and I'm sure those of you that are watching this or experienced with this, or Boyd, you're missing this, this, and this. But these basic concepts here of what's got me started, and I'm basically printing out good parts right now. Again, guys, it's really easy to go off too far in the weeds on this stuff. You want to keep that in mind. You start going in here and you start messing with all these little settings in here, right? And you're going to dial your printer right out to where it doesn't even do good prints anymore. It's very, very easy to do something like that. Most of these default settings are going to be pretty close. It's mainly the print speed, the layers, the layer thickness, the temperatures, and things like that that you're going to be mostly paying attention to. And once you get those dialed in, they pretty much stay the same unless you change filament or, something like that. So anyway, I hope this helped you out. I hope it gets you off to a basic start, you guys, and gives you a basic understanding of the concept of this. And again, the menu might be a little different on a different type of program, but the basics are all going to be still the same. So that's it, guys, using the Cura slicer and how I got started on printing these parts. By the way, these parts that I'm printing, guys, these are not parts you really want to start with. I chose a really difficult model to start with here. Maybe I'm a glutton for punishment or whatever, but I just really wanted the Nautilus, and I just had to figure it out. But you can use much simpler models than this to get started on and learn the basics, you guys. All right, so that's it for that. Let's go back after we're done with this and have a look at how some of the parts are finishing printing here, and we'll call this video a wrap. Be right back. All right, everybody. Well, we're just checking in on the progress of our print here that we just got finished laying out in our Cura Slicer program. It's been printing for about 10 hours, so it's just about halfway through with the print, and everything's pretty much turning out as I expected it to, you guys. Those little supports that we added on the bottom made our issue go away down here. Now these little areas where it's not filling in completely, those I'm not so sure that in the model that they're designed to be punched out later on, because there are some vents that go over the top of this, some separate parts, and they may want to have that open, because every one of these prints has turned out like that, where that area, those recessed areas have been printing extremely thin, and that has nothing to do with the support part of this. So you can see that as it's working its way up, it kind of gets thin and then comes back and thin and comes back. So that material can actually be removed after this is done if we choose to do that. Now you can see on the side here what I was talking about, these limber holes here. It's doing a pretty good job filling those in without the support. There's a little bit of, through spots here and there. Let's see if I can get a better view from this side. But that's not a problem at all. We can come back after this model is finished, and we can fill that in from behind with a little bit of UV liquid resin, and then we can straighten those right out. They're just recesses in there, and once the model's all painted, you won't be able to see back in there very far at all. Anyway, they'll be darkly shaded in there, so that's not a worry. We did have a little bit of an issue here as it made that little radius that I talked about, where it was calling for a little bit of support, but all it did was leave these little pieces of stock there. It didn't create any kind of anomalies or holes or anything, so that will clean up really easy too. So if the rest of the model continues to print up as well as it's gone so far, I think we're going to be plenty fine. You can see that it was also calling for supports around these little light sockets here. There's actually sockets included in this to put your LEDs into for the lighting on the side walls here, and they're printing out just fine. You can see all that support work that we did in there. All that's going to get most of it broken out after we're done, and hopefully they can be broken off pretty easy and removed. But that whole floor pattern that we created in there, the floor support is intact, and it doesn't look like any of the supports are interfering or above the level of the floor like we were hoping, so that should turn out nice and flat. So thumbs up here, guys. If this turns out good, that'll be the last big piece of the model that we're going to be printing as far as the hull is concerned. And so we'll come back after this is finished printing. We'll show you how we're going to do a little bit of cleanup on it, and then we'll show you the rest of the parts kind of all put together so you can see the ship in one piece and how it's going to look. I'll be right back with that. Okay guys, well here's a look at the model all mocked up. You can see all the hull pieces have been put together. It winds up coming out to around 42 inches or 3.5 feet. So I was thinking that this was going to be a little small initially, but I'm really happy with it. I think it's the exact right size I was hoping for. The 66 inch was too big, and this is just right. You're going to see a lot of nice detail, but this printer did a really nice job for being a filament type printer. It's only got one light coat of primer on it right now, so there's a lot of small imperfections that are still showing up, but another 1 or 2 coats of this high build primer and it's going to start looking really nice. The seams are going to come out really well. It's got like these little flanges on the inside of the parts to help line everything up, and all the way back to the back. You can see it even has a steerable rudder here, and this propeller turns really nice, and the propeller is perfectly true. It doesn't wobble or anything like that. So I'm actually going to motorize this thing too, and turn that propeller with a small little motor on the inside, working on a little control board for that. And then we're going to have our lighting up here at front on the in the salon here and in the wheelhouse. I just wanted to show you guys too, I didn't show these parts, but I printed these on the same printer, the Vyper, and it shows you what a nice job a filament type printer can do on a really fine detail part like this. The window frames turned out really nice, and you can see they'll just kind of go up on here. Let me kind of set this up on here. And you can see how really nice that's going to look, you guys. I got it a little bit low there. But anyway, once it's all lined up and everything, it's going to look really good. It put the little rivet detail on there. really nice. And we'll make a little, I'm going to try to print these little lenses here. I just actually now have a resin printer coming in. I went ahead and got an Any Cubic 8K resin printer, and I'm going to print these in clear. And if hopefully between that and doing a little bit of polishing on that, I can get it to look pretty good. If not, we're going to use those parts as bucks, and we're going to vacuum form those parts with some clear acetate. Same thing for this big one up here. Now these little bulges up here I'm not too worried about. If they're a little foggy, that's actually fine. I just want to have the really clear resin or plastic, whatever we wind up with, in the areas that we're really going to be able to see. So these two windows here and the two main salon windows. These other ones here, it doesn't matter to me if they're a little bit foggy, because those are just light sources. So a little bit of diffusion on those will be a good thing anyway. Even if they come out really clear, I'll have to diffuse those. So that's the plan, you guys. I'll be starting to print some of the small little detail parts now when the resin printer gets here over the weekend. And we'll be back with a whole kind of another introduction to a whole different version of printing, you guys. I'm going into this jumping in deep with both feet. So that's what I said I was going to do, and I just decided to go with the resin printer in addition to what I had, so that way I can do both and I won't be burdening my friends or whatever to ask them to print parts that I can't do here. I'll be able to do that completely on my own, and I need to learn it anyway. That's what my real objectives are. So I hope you guys have enjoyed this kind of introduction to my first journey into 3D printing here. I had some failures and success, but once we got the printer dialed in, we had the issue with the hothead on the printer that must have came that way, you know, messed up from the factory. And once I got that straightened out, all the blobbing and everything disappeared, and the parts started coming out really clean. So it's working really good. There'll be a few more parts I'll print with that machine. Probably the lifeboat here on the top. There's a little vent section here up on the top. I think I can print with that. Maybe some of these additional, I call them razorbacks, that go on the sides. They're thick enough, and hopefully I can align them properly on the bed without too many supports, and they'll print out. But when it comes to all the whole interior for the salon and all that, all those parts, the little handrails, the little hand grabs, the wheels that go on all the little hatch covers, the hatch covers themselves, I'm going to do all that in resin, because that's just going to be a better way to go. Alright, you guys, well, that's a wrap for this one. Things are looking really good here. This will just be kind of a slow process. Printing takes a long time. As I mentioned, the center section there alone took 32 hours to print, and I don't know how much faster resin printing is. A lot of those are going to be small parts, and I can put multiple parts on the same bed when I do that, so maybe that'll save a little bit of time, but it all depends. So no hurry on this at all, you guys. I'm just kind of going along in between other projects with this, but just wanted to get started and go down that 3D printing rabbit hole. We'll see you next time, everybody. Until we do, take care and happy modeling, you guys.